My name is Emily Parker. I am 33 years old, an aerospace engineer working in Singapore. People think a job like mine means stability, respect, and a life under control. But for years, my reality was very different. Every paycheck I earned was sent back home to support my parents and my younger sister. I thought it was love. I thought it was duty. Until one evening, during a video call, my mother's voice came through the screen as if it were nothing at all. She said, "We sold your condo. The money is going to Brianna's wedding, $105,000. Family takes care of family Emily." I could not speak. My father smiled proud of his decision. My sister leaned forward and whispered like it was a joke, "You should thank us, Emily. This way, at least your money is finally useful." In that moment, my chest burned with shock, then froze with a silence I had never known before. They thought they had stolen my future without consequence, but what they did not know was that I had prepared for this. Quietly, carefully, I had left them a trap in plain sight. And when the truth finally came out, the ones who called me unstable would be the ones standing as defendants. So how does a family tear itself apart over a wedding? And how did I turn their betrayal into the moment I took my life back? At that time, I was living in a small studio apartment in Singapore, not much bigger than the kitchen back home. The air outside carried the thick heat of the tropics, and the hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound in the room until the chime of my laptop echoed sharp and clear. My mother's name lit the screen. I rubbed my eyes, tired from another late night at the aerospace firm where I spent my days working through endless designs and meetings. Even though I was thousands of miles from home every week, I sent money back to the United States. I paid the mortgage on the family house. I covered the credit card bills that never seemed to stop piling up. I even took care of Brianna's student loans. I had done it for so long that it became second nature, as if keeping them afloat was my job as much as the one I was actually hired to do. When I answered the call, my mother's face filled the screen. Her smile was wide, her voice bright and sweet. I knew that tone well. She only used it when she wanted something or when she had already done something I was not going to like. "Emily, honey," she said, "we have the most wonderful news." Behind her, I could see my father Arthur sitting in his chair with that practiced grin of his, the one he wore when he was about to say something difficult, but hoped if he smiled enough it would sound like a gift. And in the background, I heard a burst of laughter that could only belong to Brianna. My stomach tightened. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke. "What news?" I tried to keep my voice even, but I could hear the weariness in it, the edge that comes from months of sleepless nights, and too many hours spent on both my job and theirs. My mother's eyes shone. "You will be so happy for us," she said. "Brianna has been planning the wedding of her dreams." Of course she has, I thought. She had spent years dreaming while I had spent years working. But I kept quiet. My mother pressed on. "We finally found a way to make it all possible." My father leaned closer, nodding as if he were about to deliver the punchline of a joke. "You know the apartment downtown," he said, "the one you hardly ever use." My heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" His grin widened. "We sold it." The words landed like a blow, but I forced my face to stay still. Sold it. The apartment I had bought with my own salary, the one I had kept in my name as proof that I had made something of myself. The apartment I had thought of as mine. My mother jumped in quickly as if to soften the edges. It was the perfect solution, she said. Enough to cover everything for the wedding and still have some left over. Brianna's voice cut in, then bubbling with excitement. "Isn't it perfect, Emily? Now I can have the wedding I always wanted. 300 guests, the estate with the view, the flowers from overseas, everything." She was radiant, her cheeks glowing. To her, it was a dream come true. To me, it was a nightmare. I felt the air in the room grow heavy. My hands rested on the keyboard, but I did not move. My mother went on as if nothing was wrong. It is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Emily. You understand? We already put down deposits, the dress, the caterer, the music. It will be magical. I heard the word magical and almost laughed. Magical for them, maybe. For me, it was betrayal. I asked quietly, how did you manage to sell property that is in my name? My father cleared his throat. We handled some of the paperwork ourselves. You know how family helps family. Family! I repeated the word in my mind. They had forged my name. They had crossed the one line I thought they would never cross. My mother's voice turned soft-wounded, as if I were the one at fault for even asking. Do not say it like that. We are family. We look out for each other. Brianna rolled her eyes, leaning in close to the camera. You can always buy another apartment when you get back. You make so much money, Emily. At least this way the money goes to something meaningful. Meaningful. My voice barely more than a whisper. She nodded firmly. Yes. I stared at their faces on the screen, so full of excitement and pride, not a trace of guilt. In that moment, I realized something deep and cold. To them, I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a solution, a bank account, with a face they recognized but did not respect. I pressed my lips together, holding back the storm rising inside me. Years of working in a demanding job had taught me how to keep my expression steady even when everything inside me was breaking. Congratulations, I said finally. I am sure it will be a beautiful wedding. Brianna clapped her hands like a child. I knew you would understand. You are the best big sister. My mother beamed. My father nodded. Brianna glowed. I said I had to go, that work was calling. They said they loved me. I ended the call. The screen went black, and in that reflection, I saw a woman I barely recognized. My face looked calm, but my chest ached with a weight I could not name. They thought I would take it quietly, that I would smile and accept. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself a small, sharp smile in the silence of my room. But when the smile faded, the words from that call came back slow and heavy, echoing in my head. We sold it. The perfect solution. A family asset. I whispered those words out loud, as if saying them might make them less real, but they only cut deeper. That condo was mine. I had worked nights and weekends to buy it. I had walked through it the day I signed the papers and thought, finally, this is proof that I am building a life on my own. Now, my father's voice replayed in my mind, cheerful and careless. We sold your condo. Enough to cover the wedding and more. He said it like he was offering me a gift, and my mother's voice sweet as sugar, but sharper than glass. It is a family asset, Emily. You hardly used it. She had looked into the camera as if she expected me to nod along to agree with her twisted logic. Then, Brianna's laughter rang out so full of delight. This is a once-in-a-lifetime wedding, she said, her words bubbling with excitement. She spoke as though my home, my hard work had no value compared to her dream of walking down an aisle in a dress she did not pay for. My chest tightened as I remembered her face glowing with pride, not even seeing the devastation in mine. My mother's words landed next as if she had rehearsed them. Parents raise their children, and one day children repay them. That is only fair. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the blank screen after the call had ended, hearing those words again and again. Repay them. As though my years of sending money home, my endless transfers for their mortgage, their bills, their debts, had meant nothing. My father nodded in the background of the call, agreeing with her, smiling that tired smile. Consider it helping the family just as we helped you. That was what he said, as if my success belonged to them, as if everything I earned was theirs to spend. I did not argue. I did not shout. I did not cry. I sat in silence, and they mistook it for agreement. They thought my quiet meant surrender. But in that quiet, something inside me was changing. I thought of the long nights at the office, the cheap noodles I ate to save money, the times I ignored my own needs because theirs always came first. I thought of every holiday I missed because work kept me overseas while they celebrated with the money I sent. I thought of Brianna's endless demands of my mother's pride, of my father's excuses. They had always seen me as the responsible one, the strong one, the one who would never say no. And maybe that was true once, but not anymore. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The pain was sharp, yes, but beneath it there was something colder, steadier. Anger, clear and restrained, waiting for the right moment. They believed they had taken from me without consequence. They believed I would keep carrying them no matter how much it cost me. But this time was different. This time they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I opened my eyes and looked at the reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. My face was calm, almost too calm, but my thoughts were racing. They had stolen from me. They had forged my name. They had told themselves it was fair, it was family, it was repayment. I whispered to myself, barely moving my lips. Silence does not mean surrender. Silence means war. My heartbeat slowed. The decision was made. I would not rush, I would not shout. I would wait, and when I moved, I would make sure they never forgot what they had done. I closed the laptop, the room falling back into silence. I had carried my family for years, but tonight, sitting alone in a city half a world away, I understood something I had never allowed myself to admit. I was not their daughter anymore. I was their solution, and I would not play that role again. Not after this. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the glowing skyline of Singapore, the city alive with light, while mine felt darker than ever. Yet inside that darkness, a spark had been lit. They had made their cold declaration, and mine was coming soon. I sat at my desk, staring at the dark laptop screen, my own reflection looking back at me. Calm on the surface, steady, but inside I felt the weight of every year I had carried them, pressing down like a stone. If I was going to answer this betrayal, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I opened my files, the ones I had locked away long ago, when I first realised my family's weakness with money could one day become dangerous. Inside my secure cloud folder were the original deeds, the contracts, the records no one else had access to. I scrolled through until my eyes found the document I needed. And there it was, the downtown condo. Not in my name, not directly. Years ago, I had transferred it into Northbridge Holdings, the company I set up quietly, a shield for my investments. My family never knew. To them, the condo was mine, something they thought they could sell while I was away. But in truth, they had committed fraud against a corporation, and that gave me power. For the first time that night, I felt steady ground beneath me. I picked up my phone and called Naomi. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep, but sharp the moment she heard mine. I told her everything. The condo, the forged papers, the sale. I kept my voice calm, but I could hear the steel under every word. Naomi listened without interrupting and then said firmly, "We will file an injunction. Fraud voids the sale, Emily. You are in the right." Those words were like air in my lungs. I was not powerless. I was not cornered. I had the law on my side and a friend who would stand with me. After I hung up, I thought the night might finally give me peace. But my phone buzzed again. It was Amara Patel, a loan officer from the bank I had dealt with before. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Her tone was cautious, urgent. She told me she had seen troubling things. My parents had come in more than once trying to apply for loans in my name. They had brought papers with my details, but something always looked off. The bank had denied them, flagged the applications, but she wanted me to know. This was not the first time they had crossed the line. The condo was just the biggest step in a long pattern. For a moment, I could not speak. My chest felt hollow. So they had been circling my life like vultures for months, maybe years, waiting for a chance to take more. Amara's words were simple, but they cut deeper than anything Brianna had said. This was not carelessness. This was calculated. I thanked her, and when the call ended, I sat in silence. I thought of all the times I had sent money without question. The mortgage, the credit cards, the car payments, the loans. I had been their invisible net, their safety line. And still, they had looked for ways to take more. My jaw tightened. Enough. I turned back to my computer and opened my banking accounts. One by one, I went through every automatic payment tied to them. Mortgage, utilities, credit cards, Brianna's student loan. My finger hovered for a moment, then clicked cancel. Each time I felt something inside me loosen a knot untying after years of tension. With every cancellation, I felt a weight lift. For so long, I believed helping them was love. Tonight, I understood it was chains, and I was cutting them off. When I reached the last payment, I closed my eyes and let the quiet fill the room. Relief came sharp and sudden, but so did fear. What would they do when they realised I had stopped? What would happen to the house, to the bills, to Brianna's perfect wedding when the lifeline was gone? I opened my eyes and whispered, "Let them find out." They thought I was their answer. They are about to learn what it feels like when I walk away. I shut my laptop and sat back, breathing slow and deep. The war had already begun, and this was my first move. My declaration had been made not with shouting, not with tears, but with records that could not be denied, and choices that could not be undone. They wanted me silent. I would be silent. But my silence was no longer surrender. It was power. And I felt that power as my phone buzzed on the desk beside me, buzzing so often it seemed alive. I had not answered a single call since I cut off the money. I had not written a single word back to them. And already the cracks were showing. The first voice to break through was Paige, my sister's wedding planner. Her messages filled my inbox one after another, her voice high and tight with panic. She said the deposit for the florist had bounced, the venue was demanding cash. Up front, the band was refusing to hold the date without payment. She begged me to call her back. She promised she would find a way to smooth things over, if only I would explain what was happening with the accounts. I listened once then, deleted every message. My silence was answer enough. They had wanted this wedding to be the grandest show in town. Now their show was slipping through their fingers. While the phone kept flashing, Naomi called me. Her tone was calm, but I could hear the edge of excitement. She had found a name in the paperwork. Cliff Dalton. A broker who had smoothed the sale through without raising questions, a man with a reputation for turning his head if the money was right. She told me this proved something important. My parents had not just betrayed me. They had pulled in someone willing to push forged papers across a desk and take his cut. Fraud was one thing. Fraud with a broker on record was another. It meant they were not the only ones on the hook. It meant the case was stronger than ever. I thanked her, and after the call ended, I sat for a long time staring at my muted family group chat. Finally, I opened it and scrolled. Dad's messages tried to sound calm, talking about banking delays and paperwork problems. Mum typed lines of comfort to Brianna, saying everything would be fine, not to let the stress spoil her excitement. And Brianna's words filled the screen, long paragraphs about her dress fitting her photographer, her flowers, but really about the comments on her social media. She worried people were whispering, wondering if her perfect day was slipping away. She was not worried about fraud. She was worried about embarrassment. Then, I saw Ethan's name. His messages were short, sharp, and growing colder. He asked where the condo money had gone. He asked why deposits were bouncing if the sale had already closed. He asked why the family seemed to be hiding something. He did not accuse anyone yet, but I could feel the distance forming. It was there in his words. The cracks had reached him too. I sat back and let it sink in. For years, I had been the one who rushed in. I fixed things before they broke. I paid bills before they were due. I answered calls before they turned into crises. Now, I did nothing. And by doing nothing, I watched the dominoes start to fall. Paige was panicking, her career hanging by a thread. Cliff was exposed, his fingerprints on forged papers. Ethan was unsettled, the picture perfect engagement cracking at the edges. And Brianna still clinging to her image, watching her own followers question her story. I felt no joy in any of it, but I did feel something steady. A cold kind of satisfaction that at last the weight was not on my shoulders. The weight was on theirs. I put the phone face down on the desk and looked out at the Singapore skyline, the towers sharp against the night. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. They thought I would chase them down, fix their mistakes, rescue their image. But this time, I would not lift a finger. One crack, then another. Soon, the whole thing would fall. And I would be right here to watch it. That thought was still fresh in my mind when Naomi sent me the first screenshot from the family group chat. The messages were sharp, short, and frantic. Brianna accusing Dad of hiding money. Mum trying to smooth it over with empty words. Dad typing and deleting, then sending a half-hearted excuse about a minor banking delay. But I knew that tone. That wasn't just a delay. That was guilt. Naomi called me an hour later. Her voice was careful, like she wasn't sure how much I wanted to know. Emily, they're unravelling faster than I thought. Arthur didn't use all the condo money for the wedding. He skimmed some off the top. I felt my chest tighten. For what I asked, though, I already knew. Gambling. The one shadow that had followed him since I was a child. Naomi sighed. He paid off old debts. The numbers don't lie. I pictured Brianna's face when she found out. For her, every dollar was a flower arrangement, a champagne fountain, another layer of sparkle on her perfect day. To learn that Dad had burned part of it at the tables must have felt like betrayal stacked on betrayal. Naomi confirmed it a moment later. Brianna stormed out of the house, screaming that he ruined her life. Linda tried to calm her, but she only made it worse. I sat by the window in my Singapore apartment phone, in my hand watching the sky darken. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like watching a storm hit the same coastline over and over, one I had tried for years to hold together with my own hands. The next call came not from Naomi, but from Ethan. His voice was low, heavy with doubt. Emily, I know you and I don't talk much, but I need to ask. Is it true that your family's been living off you all these years, that the condo sale wasn't even legal? I chose my words with care. Ethan, I can't give you details, but I will say this. Everything you suspect, and worse, is true. He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, I can't marry into this, not like this. And before I could respond, the line went dead. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Brianna must have felt the ground slip beneath her feet at that very moment. The wedding, the money, the image she built online piece by piece, it was all cracking. And I hadn't lifted more than a finger. The weight of their own lies was pulling them under. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files I had kept tucked away for years. Every mortgage payment, every credit card bill, every loan installment for Brianna's college. 4 years of steady deposits from Northbridge Holdings, carefully hidden so they would never know who was behind the curtain. Until now. I gathered them into one neat folder and attached it to an email addressed to all 3 of them. In the body, I wrote only one line. This is what I have done for you. And this is how you repaid me. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment. I thought about Mum's tired eyes, Dad's forced cheer, Brianna's smug little smile. Then I pressed it. I imagined the silence that must have followed on their end when the files opened. The numbers were undeniable. Year after year, thousands upon thousands flowing into their accounts, while I lived in a one-bedroom overseas, eating instant noodles and telling myself family came first. And now the truth was staring them in the face. I wondered what they would say to each other. Would Dad admit his debts were covered by me, not some mysterious benefactor? Would Mum finally realise that the house standing over her head was not a gift from fate, but from me? Would Brianna understand that her college diploma had my name written all over it in invisible ink? I doubted they would thank me. Gratitude had never been part of their vocabulary. More likely they would scream at each other, pointing fingers until the house shook. Dad calling Brianna ungrateful, Brianna calling Dad a thief, Mom caught in the middle, ashamed and furious all at once. And through it all, the wedding plans would slip further away, like sand running through their fingers. I sat very still, staring out at the skyline. I had always imagined that if the truth ever came out, I would feel lighter. But the truth carried its own kind of weight. Not the weight of obligation, but of finality. There was no going back now. No patching up, no pretending this was just another family argument. They would see me differently from this moment on, not as their provider, not as their safety net, but as the one who finally turned the mirror toward them. The ache in my chest pulsed with every breath. I told myself it was sorrow. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was relief. The storm had finally broken inside their home, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice. The cracks had become fractures deep and jagged, and they had done it all to themselves. I whispered to the empty room. They thought they were breaking me, but all they've broken is themselves. For a few hours after that, I let myself believe it was over. The apartment was still legally mine, the payments were cut off, and the family was in chaos. I felt calm for the first time in months. But calm can be a fragile thing. It lasted only until Naomi called. Her voice carried that edge I had come to recognise, the sound she used when she was bracing herself to tell me something I would not want to hear. "Emily," she said slowly, "they filed something new." I remember sitting down at the edge of my bed, phone pressed tight to my ear. Filed what I asked, though part of me already knew this wasn't going to be anything simple. "A countersuit," she said. "They're claiming you're mentally unstable." The words hit harder than the first betrayal. Unstable. I repeated it out loud just to taste how bitter it felt. Yes, Naomi confirmed, they're saying your financial support was not generosity but control, that you used money to manipulate them, that you've been acting irrationally. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Every late night at the office, every skipped vacation, every quiet meal of noodles while I sent money across the ocean, all of it now twisted into abuse. I asked who put this idea in their heads. Naomi didn't pause. "Brianna, she's been pushing it and your parents are following her lead. They're desperate." I felt sick. My little sister, the one I'd carried through college with quiet transfers, she never thanked me for now trying to paint me as insane. Naomi went on. "Cliff Dalton is tied in again. He found a doctor willing to sign false records saying you're paranoid, controlling, possibly unfit to manage your own affairs." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers hard against my temples. My own family aided by a crooked broker and a fake doctor, trying to erase my credibility with one word: unstable. The fear came fast and sharp. What if people believed them? What if the years I spent building my career and my reputation could be undone by a single forged report? What if, in the eyes of the court, my silence and distance from home could be twisted into proof of their lies? I felt the walls of my hotel room press closer. I thought of the whispers already floating online, the cruel comments I had seen when this first broke. Now those whispers had fuel. Naomi spoke again, steady and clear. "We'll fight it. But you need to understand, public opinion is fragile. Already some are asking if you're just a rich sister controlling your family. They don't know the truth yet." I thought of Brianna posting pictures in white dresses, smiling for a world that didn't know the price of that smile. I thought of my mother always repeating that phrase, "Family takes care of family," as if theft could be rebranded as loyalty. And I thought of my father silent when I begged for honesty, willing to sign whatever lie Brianna put in front of him. My chest burned with a mix of shame and fury. For a brief moment, doubt crawled in. Maybe I had been controlling. Maybe my need to provide had created this monster of entitlement. But the truth rose just as quickly. I never asked for anything in return. I never demanded obedience. I gave because I loved them, and they decided that love was weakness. Naomi's voice pulled me back. "Emily, they're playing their black card now. They want to end this before it reaches trial." I opened my eyes and stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My face looked older, harder, but also sharper, as if the mask of the good daughter had finally cracked away. "Let them," I said. "If they want to call me unstable, then let the lights be bright enough for everyone to see who they really are." Naomi was silent for a moment, then said, "We'll prepare. I promise you we'll expose them." I whispered back, "Not just expose, we'll finish this." I ended the call and sat in silence, the word unstable still ringing in my ears. For the first time, I realized the battle wasn't only about money or property. It was about my very identity, my right to be believed, my right to define myself. They wanted me voiceless, but they had no idea that in the courtroom, under those lights, I would find the voice they had spent years trying to bury. The room was colder than I expected. Wooden benches filled with strangers and a few reporters, the low hum of whispered comments, the gavel striking to call us to order. I sat at the table beside Naomi, her steady presence grounding me. Across from us, my parents and Brianna sat together, whispering quickly, stealing glances at me. I could see the determination on Brianna's face, the way she tilted her chin as if she was already the victor. My father looked worn. My mother clutched a tissue she dabbed at eyes that were dry. The judge called the first witness. My father rose, and as he walked to the stand, I braced myself. He spoke about me like I was a stranger. He said I was obsessive, controlling, that I worked myself to exhaustion, and had no grasp on reality. He called me unstable. His voice was calm, almost regretful, and for a moment I could hear the murmurs of people in the gallery. My mother followed her voice soft and wavering, saying she had lived in fear of my outbursts, that I manipulated them with money. She dabbed at her eyes again, convincing in her performance. Then Brianna stepped forward. She didn't hold back. She called me jealous, bitter, desperate to destroy her happiness, because I could not find my own. She told the judge I ruined her wedding out of spite. She painted me as lonely, unhinged, unable to stand the thought of her joy. For a moment, as the words hung in the air, I felt a tremor in my chest. They had rehearsed these lies. They knew where to hit me. I could sense the crowd shifting, a doubt pressing in, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Naomi leaned close and whispered, "Now's the moment." I stood. My legs carried me forward, and as I took the stand, I felt the room fall quiet. I took a breath, let it fill me, and began. I told the truth in plain words. For years, I said I had been the one keeping that family afloat. Month after month, I paid their mortgage. I covered debts. I even paid part of Brianna's tuition. I did it quietly, without recognition, because I thought that was what family did. They wanted to call me controlling. They wanted to say I used money to trap them. But the truth was, I had given without asking for anything in return, until they crossed the one line that mattered. I gestured to Naomi and she placed the folder in front of me. The judge nodded for me to proceed. I opened it slowly, letting the silence stretch. Inside were the records of Northbridge Holdings LLC. I lifted the first document and read aloud. The condo they claimed as mine had not been in my name for years. It was owned entirely by a corporation. I managed a legal entity separate from me. By forging my signature, I said they had not just stolen from their daughter. They had committed corporate fraud, a crime with far heavier weight. I laid down the next set of papers, payment histories, transfers from Northbridge to their mortgage, their credit cards, even deposits that cleared their late bills. I turned to face them, then my voice steady and low. For 4 years I supported this family. Quietly, consistently, without a word of thanks. You wanted to call me unstable. You wanted the world to believe I was jealous, bitter and unwell. But what you did was not only betrayal, it was fraud. I looked directly at the judge and said, "From this moment, I am the plaintiff. You are the defendants." The words landed like a hammer. The gallery gasped. My father went pale, his mouth opening, but no sound coming out. My mother dropped her tissue and clutched at his arm. Brianna shook her head, her voice breaking as she tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced her with a sharp look. The judge leaned forward, studying the papers, then ordered them entered into evidence. Her voice was crisp, cutting through the whispers. These documents will be reviewed immediately. This changes the scope of the case. I stepped down from the stand, my hands still trembling, but my spine straight. As I sat beside Naomi, she gave me the smallest smile, her eyes proud. My family looked at me across the room, not as their bank, not as their scapegoat, but as the person who had just turned their world upside down. I felt my heartbeat slowing. For the first time in years, I was not cornered. I was not their victim. I was in control. They thought they could break me. They thought they could silence me. Instead, under the courtroom lights, I had finally found my voice, and they would never forget it. I said those words, and the room seemed to tilt. Instead of me sitting under their accusations, it was my family who suddenly looked exposed. The judge let the silence stretch, then cleared her throat and ordered the first witness to be called. I let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding. For the first time in months, the weight was not pressing down on me. It was shifting, and it was finally pressing down where it belonged. Amara Patel stepped forward, steady and professional. She worked at the bank, and she spoke with the calm confidence of someone used to dealing with numbers that never lied. She explained how several loan applications had been submitted in my name. They were full of mistakes, sloppy handwriting, inconsistent information, things no genuine applicant would ever miss. She described how those applications had been flagged again and again at different branches with different signatures that never matched mine. The judge leaned forward, asking her to clarify, and Amara said it plain these were attempts at identity theft. She even looked toward my parents and sister as she said it. My stomach twisted, because hearing the crime named out loud hurt more than I expected, but it also gave me relief. I was no longer the only one carrying the truth. When she stepped down, the courtroom was quiet. No one dared look at me. Next came Paige, the wedding planner. She looked tired, almost defeated, but she spoke anyway. She told the court about the bounced checks, the unpaid deposits, the caterer who threatened to walk away the florist, who refused to deliver another stem without cash. She listed 17 vendors who had been strung along, some of them now threatening to sue her personally. Her voice cracked when she admitted how much her reputation had been ruined just by being tied to this wedding. And then she repeated the words that I knew by heart because I had lived them. She said Brianna told her again and again, "Just call my sister, she'll fix it." The murmur that ran through the courtroom was sharp like a wave cutting through the air. My sister covered her face with her hands, but it was too late. Everyone had heard it. They saw what I had always seen. Then Cliff Dalton took the stand. He looked smaller than I remembered his slick charm gone. He did not fight. He knew his only chance was to tell the truth. He admitted to pushing the paperwork through knowing it was forged. He admitted to taking bribes to look the other way, and even to connecting my parents with a doctor willing to sign false papers if they wanted to claim I was unstable. His words dropped like stones. I watched my parents flinch with every one. My mother shook her head as if denying it could erase it. My father's jaw tightened. My sister looked ready to scream, but she stayed silent, her lips pressed so hard they turned white. The prosecutor stood then calm and methodical. She tied everything together. She laid out the Northbridge records proving the condo was never theirs to sell. She pointed to Amara's testimony showing a pattern of stolen identity and failed fraud. She used Paige's words to prove reckless spending and reputational harm. She leaned on Cliff's confession to prove intent, not mistake. And she looked at the judge with quiet certainty as she listed the charges: fraud, forgery, identity theft, and false accusations. It was airtight. I did not need to add a word. I sat in my chair, still, a stone letting it all wash over me. My heart pounded, but not with fear anymore, with vindication. For years I had been the quiet one, the one who held everything together while they drained me dry. Now, the truth stood on its own, stronger than I ever could have shouted. It was there in black and white, in signatures that did not match, in bank records that never lied, in vendors who had been burned, in a broker who had run out of excuses. I looked across the room at the people I had once called family. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them, like their masks had been torn away. My mother's eyes darted everywhere but toward me. My father stared at the floor. Brianna glared at me with pure hatred, but even she could not deny what was unfolding. The walls were closing in, and this time there was no one to blame but themselves. The judge announced that closing arguments would come, after all the evidence was reviewed. The gavel struck sharp and final. I sat back and breathed, not with triumph, but with something steadier. They had wanted me silent. Now the truth spoke louder than any of us, and there was no taking it back. The judge left the bench for a short recess, and the room buzzed with low voices and rustling papers. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, while the storm began right beside me. At first it was a whisper, Brianna leaning toward my father, with her face twisted in fury. I could not hear every word, but the venom in her voice carried. Then she stopped whispering. She accused him outright, her voice cracking as she said he had taken part of the condo money and blown it on his gambling debts. The room shifted at once. Heads turned, gasps slipped from the gallery, and Arthur's face went red as he barked back that she should keep her mouth shut. He said he had only done it to protect the family, to cover debts that would have destroyed them long before the wedding ever could. The gallery erupted in murmurs. My father's words echoed across the wood panels, sharp and desperate. But Brianna did not back down. She stood her heels clicking against the floor and shouted that none of this would have happened if he had not stolen from me, if he had not pretended that my home was his to sell. She turned on him, calling him weak, reckless, a failure. His hand slammed against the table, and his voice thundered in reply that this was all because of her. Because of her endless demands, her tantrums, her obsession with a fairy tale wedding that cost more than a lifetime of honest work. He spat the word spoiled and selfish, and she shrieked that she deserved it, that she was entitled to one good thing in her life, because I had never shared my success with her. And then it was my mother's turn. She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing, trying to make herself heard over their shouts. She admitted she had looked away, when my father gambled, when Brianna demanded, when the debt stacked higher and higher. She said she had only wanted to keep our family's image intact, to hold on to the dream that we were normal, respectable, whole. Her voice cracked under the weight of her confession, and then she collapsed back into her seat, rocking and crying, in full view of everyone. The reporters' pens scratched against their notepads. Phones lifted to catch video flashes popping as the family I once belonged to tore itself apart in a public courtroom. Ethan sat behind them, silent, his face a mask of shame and disgust. His eyes avoided Brianna's. He looked like a man who had already made up his mind, who had already stepped away in his heart. I stayed where I was still unshaken. There was no pleasure in watching them unravel, but there was no guilt either. For years I had been their shield, the one who caught the blows and fixed the mess. Not this time. The words they flung at each other cut deep because they were true, and truth has a way of tearing through pretenses faster than any accusation I could have made. For once, I did not need to speak. Their own voices condemned them. As the shouting swelled and then broke into bitter sobs, I closed my eyes for a moment. Sadness pricked the edges of my calm, but I let it pass. They had chosen this path each in their own way. My father, with his gambling, my mother with her silence, my sister with her greed. I had given them years of sacrifice, and still they had tried to take more. I had nothing left to give. The gavel cracked through the chaos as the judge returned, her voice slicing the air, demanding order. She warned that if the family could not control themselves, they would be removed. Slowly their shouting died down, though Brianna's glare burned across the room, her face streaked with angry tears. Arthur sagged in his chair, eyes dark with defeat. Linda dabbed at her face, her shoulders shaking. I sat straighter, my pulse steady, my resolve unshakable. This was not my fight anymore. It was theirs, and they had finally shown the world who they really were. For once, I was not the one cleaning up their mess, and I never would be again. I sat straighter in my chair as the gavel came down, and the judge called the court back to order. The room hushed at once, the tension so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Judge Martinez cleared her throat, her eyes sweeping the courtroom before she began. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and though my heart raced, my mind was steady. I wanted to hear the truth spoken aloud by someone who had the authority to end this nightmare. She began with my father, Arthur Parker. The words were precise, formal cutting. He had knowingly forged my signature, conspired with a broker to bypass the law, and attempted to profit from property that was never his. His crime was deliberate and sustained. The sentence, 18 months in minimum security prison restitution, required to Northbridge Holdings and a ban on attempting to contact me during or after his release. I saw him sag in his chair, his shoulders folding in on themselves. For years, he had strutted through life pretending to be in control. Now he looked small, almost invisible. Next came my mother, Linda Parker. The judge spoke of how she endorsed the fraud, helped file false reports against me, and tried to weaponize the system to protect her lies. 12 months in custody, probation afterward, restitution required, and no contact permitted. My mother pressed tissues to her eyes, her sobs echoing through the courtroom. But the judge did not soften. I watched her fold into herself, and for the first time I felt no obligation to comfort her. Then the judge turned to my sister, Brianna Parker. The tone sharpened. She had been the instigator, the one who pushed the sale forward, the one who demanded my money be turned into her wedding spectacle. Worse, she had pressed the countersuit, labelling me unstable and trying to erase my credibility with false medical claims. Guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud and defamation, ordered to restitution and community service. When the words sank in, Brianna's face twisted. She shot to her feet, insisting she was the real victim, shouting that her wedding was ruined because of me. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand heavy on her shoulder, forcing her back down. Her voice cracked into silence. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. Restitution would be directed to Northbridge Holdings, restoring the property to the rightful corporate owner. A restraining order was issued. None of them, my father, my mother, or my sister, would be allowed to contact me directly or indirectly. The final blow came with the gavel. Court adjourned. Around me, whispers broke out like a wave. Reporters scribbled, some already rushing to the exit to feed their stories to the outside world. I heard the words as they passed from mouth to mouth. Daughter wins, family jailed, wedding scheme collapses. I turned my head just enough to see Ethan stand from the gallery. He didn't say a word to Brianna. He just walked out, leaving her behind to absorb the weight of her own choices. Naomi reached across and squeezed my hand. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was heavier than that. It was vindication. The weight I had carried for so long, the endless silence and sacrifice, had finally been acknowledged for what it was. The truth was no longer mine alone to bear. It was public, undeniable, and sealed by the authority of the court. My father stared at the floor, his hands trembling. My mother sobbed quietly, twisting her tissue into shreds. My sister glared at me with open hatred, her face flushed and her eyes wide with rage. But none of them could touch me anymore. The shield between us was not only emotional, now it was legal. They had lost. I rose slowly, my body stiff from hours of stillness. As I stood, I let myself breathe in the silence of the room, the power of it. I thought of all the years I had been the responsible one, the one who fixed everything, the one who paid the bills and covered the debts, and stood quietly in the background while they lived as if nothing was wrong. That life was over. Naomi leaned close and whispered, "We did it," and for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it. When I walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashed and questions were thrown at me, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The judge had done that for me. The law had spoken, and I was free. The words echoed inside me as I walked away from the courthouse and into the crisp air. Yet freedom did not feel light. It felt heavy, almost unfamiliar, like a weight had been shifted but left behind an ache in my chest. I sat in Naomi's car as she drove me across town, and when the skyline of my old neighbourhood came into view, I knew exactly where I needed to go. My condo, the place that had started all of this. I had not stepped foot inside for nearly a year. The keys felt strange in my hand as I turned them over, metal warmed by my palm. This was the space they had tried to strip from me, the home they thought they could sell off like another bill paid. And yet, it was still mine. I stood at the door for a long moment, breathing in, almost afraid to see what waited on the other side. When I pushed it open, the quiet hit me first. The condo smelled faintly of dust and old paint. My books still lined the shelves, tilted at angles, just as I had left them. The photograph of me on the day I closed the deal sat on the side table. My smile was wide, proud, full of the belief that I was finally building something of my own. I walked slowly from room to room, touching surfaces as if they belonged to someone else. The bedroom where I had worked late nights before leaving for Singapore, the kitchen where I once cooked cheap meals after saving for the down payment. Everything was familiar, yet foreign like the ghost of another life. I remembered the day I bought it. I had signed the papers alone, my parents, too busy to come Brianna uninterested. But I had not cared. For the first time, I had carved something out that was mine alone. I had decorated it carefully, little by little, building a sanctuary. And now that sanctuary had been tainted. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. Their betrayal replayed again and again, but here in these walls the memories cut sharper. This was not just about money or property. This was about trust, about years of sacrifice turned into entitlement. I walked to the balcony and opened the door, the city lights spreading below. For a moment, I tried to imagine staying here, reclaiming it as mind-breathing life back into these rooms. But I could not. The air carried too much weight, too much bitterness. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear, that I could not live here anymore. Selling it would be my last act of release. Naomi joined me inside, leaning in the doorway with her quiet strength. She had been there through every late-night call, every file, every strategy. She had believed in me when I had doubted myself. I turned to her and said what I had been holding back for so long. "Thank you." She shook her head, but I insisted. "You are my family, Naomi. Real friends are the true family." My voice cracked, but it was honest. She crossed the room and hugged me tight, and for the first time I allowed myself to cry without anger. The tears were not for my parents, not for Brianna. They were for me. For the years I had given away, for the silence I had mistaken as peace, and for the relief of finally walking away. After a while, Naomi left me alone in the condo. I needed time with it one last night. I wandered through each corner, turning off lights touching the walls like I was saying goodbye. In the bedroom, I pulled out the old journal I had once hidden in the drawer. Pages filled with hopes, savings, goals, ideas of travel, dreams of a future that I thought I could build alongside my family. I sat on the floor and read until the words blurred. Those dreams had been burned, but new ones could rise from the ashes. When the night grew late, I stood in the centre of the living room. I spoke aloud, firm and clear, as if the walls themselves needed to hear it. "You tried to take this from me. You tried to erase me, but you failed. This place is mine, and now I choose to let it go." In the morning, I called the realtor. My voice did not shake as I said the words. "I want to sell the condo. It is time." He promised to begin paperwork right away, and I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not loss, but space. Space for whatever would come next. Before leaving, I locked the door one final time. I slid the keys into my bag, knowing soon they would belong to someone else. The condo was no longer my burden, no longer my battlefield. It was just a building, and I was no longer trapped in its story. Naomi picked me up again, and as we drove away, I turned to look at the windows one last time. They glowed faintly in the morning sun, a reminder of everything I had survived. I whispered goodbye under my breath. I did not feel broken. I felt ready. Ready to leave behind the ashes, ready to find out who I was, without the constant weight of their demands. My phone buzzed with messages I ignored. For once, silence was mine alone to keep. And as the city stretched out in front of me, I finally believed it. I was free, and I was never going back. Those words carried me out of the condo and into the first clean chapter of my life. A week later, I stood in a different apartment, smaller and plainer boxes stacked around me. The air here was bare of memories, carrying no shadows of what I had lost. It was just walls and windows, and for the first time, that was exactly what I wanted. I set a small desk near the window where the light fell in the mornings. Naomi had brought me a plant green and stubborn, and I set it down on the desk like a promise. My bed was made with crisp sheets. I had bought myself no hand-me-downs, no reminders. This place did not echo with the past. It held only possibility. The silence here was different. In the condo, silence had meant waiting for the phone to ring with another demand, another bill to pay, another plea for help. Now, silence meant peace. I sat with it for long stretches of the day and felt no panic, no guilt, only calm. One afternoon, my phone rang. The number was one I recognized, Detective Rodriguez. His voice was steady, professional, but warmer than before. He told me he wanted me to know something. Since my case had gone public, other people had come forward. Children defrauded by their parents, siblings betrayed by family signatures, people who had lived in silence until they heard my story. He said, "You may not realize it, Emily, but you gave them the courage to speak." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. All those nights I had wondered if I was crazy, if I was selfish, if I was wrong to stand my ground. Now I knew I was not alone. My pain had not been wasted. It had opened the way for others. I thanked him quietly, my throat too tight to say much more. Later that evening, Naomi came over with takeout boxes, the smell of noodles filling the new space. We sat cross-legged on the floor, eating out of cartons, laughing at how empty the place still looked. At one point, I put down my fork and looked at her. She had been my anchor, my defender, my reminder that I was worth standing up for. I said it out loud, the words simple but heavy with truth. Real friends are the true family. She smiled a soft, knowing smile and squeezed my hand. After she left, I walked outside alone. The city stretched out in front of me, lights blinking like quiet signals in the distance. Behind me was the building I had chosen not because of history, but because it held none. Ahead of me was a life I had yet to build. I thought back to the years I had spent carrying my family's burdens, how I had let their voices drown out my own. I thought of the day they sold my condo, the lies they told the courtroom where they tried to erase me. And then I thought of the moment I stood under those lights and spoke the truth, and how it had changed everything. I was not bitter. I was not broken. I was simply done. I had cut the ties that strangled me, and I felt no urge to tie them back together. My family had made their choices, and I had finally made mine. The difference was that mine gave me life instead of taking it away. I breathed in the cool night air and felt a strange lightness in my chest. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace, sacrifice for love, endurance for strength. Now I understood. True strength came from boundaries, from knowing when to say no, from knowing that blood does not excuse disrespect. As I turned to go back inside, I spoke the words aloud, not for anyone else, but for myself. The day you learn to say no is the day you truly begin to live. And for the first time, I knew I was finally living. Maybe you've been through something like this yourself. Maybe the betrayal came not from strangers, but from people you once trusted the most. That kind of pain leaves a mark. It makes you question your own worth, your own voice, your right to stand tall. But I want you to know this. You are not alone, and you're not broken for needing to protect yourself. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Saying no is not selfishness. It is a way of honoring the life inside you that deserves peace. Healing does not happen overnight. For some people, it begins with quiet walks in the evening. For others, it's journaling or talking to a trusted friend or seeking the guidance of a counsellor. Some find strength in faith, others in community, and many in simply allowing themselves to rest without guilt. Whatever your path looks like, it matters, because you matter. The truth is, we cannot choose the family we are born into, but we can choose the family we build through trust, respect, and love. And sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest choice of all. Thank you for listening, for walking through this story with me. If it touched something in you, if you found a piece of your own journey here, I hope you'll stay with us for more stories like this. You can subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. No pressure, just an open invitation, because your story matters too, and we would be honoured to share it with you.